drum, which is like, sometimes my clients might play it, sometimes I play it while they're meditating. I don't do a huge amount of meditation in my sessions, but enough just to remind them to keep doing it.
Yep. So what would be some of the, I guess, common things that people would come to see you about? Like, I'm guessing there's a fairly wide...
Yeah, there's so many different things. So anxiety, depression, trauma, death, so grief and loss. I see NDIS clients as well, so that's a lot to do with physical disabilities and mental disabilities.
Mm-hmm.
Some people, lots of autistic people. So, and I really love seeing them, and I love my private clients as well. So lots of different reasons, and sometimes people just don't know where they're going in life, and they're feeling all right with anxiety and depression, but like without that, but they just don't know where they're going in life.
Yeah.
And so I do life coaching along with that as well. So, and I help people set up businesses and things like that.
Yep.
So
now, I've had it told to me on good authority, and if you contradict what I'm about to say, I'll probably edit it out. But I'm curious to know from another hypnotherapist point of view.
Yep.
I was told that there are techniques you can use, for example, that could convince someone they're drinking something that's different to what they actually are. So, like, say, for example, they could get drunk thinking they're drinking vodka when they're actually drinking water.
Yes, well, they can feel like they're getting drunk.
Isn't that all we care about, though, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, the feeling. So we can actually, that's part of an NLP process as well as hypnotherapy.
Okay.
So we can actually swap out, say, someone loves chocolate powder, like in their milk, we could swap that out for gravy powder and see your reaction then. So we can actually swap that, so they think that any chocolate now tastes like gravy powder.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, there's lots of different things that we can do with the mind, and we can sort of anchor people to those states as well.
Wow, that's so cool.
And that can happen. So people believe their stories. That's why trauma stays around for so long for people. If you've got trauma and you keep running that story in your mind consistently, that trauma stays.
Yeah, okay.
But they're cool stories, but we let them go, and then we're no longer in the trauma anymore. So we disconnect from the feeling of the trauma.
That's incredible.
Yeah, so absolutely he could have done that.
So what you were saying before, where you said, people that they were having anxiety and depression and so forth, or dealing with those sort of traumas, but they didn't know where they were going in life. Would it be fair to say that some of your clients perhaps maybe didn't seek help sooner because they were worried about who they were without those sort of things? Like, because I know myself, I've suffered anxiety a fair bit, and I feel almost like mum passing, and then the subsequent therapies that I engaged from there have helped me let go of that. And I felt like, who am I without being an anxious guy? But I've really liked sort of who I've become because of that.
Absolutely.
Moving away from it.
It's the labels, isn't it? All that anxiety and depression and grief and loss, it's all a label. So if we don't have any of those labels, we're just who we are. And being who we are is the most important thing. We don't need to be anybody else for anybody else other than ourselves. Yeah. So if we continue, I get people that come in and say, I've got anxiety, depression, ADHD, BPD, all these things. And my first thing is, just open the door and pop them out there, and we're going to work on you. Yeah. So we leave those labels at the door, and because they're not helpful, they're just a story. Yeah. So we are born who we are, and we should embrace that and honour that as much as we can without having to change so everybody else accepts us.
That's a very good point. Because something that came out for me during my sort of therapy sessions was that I was feeling these same anxious feelings because I perform. Yeah. And every time before I get on stage, I would start breathing a bit heavier, and my heart would flutter and that. Yeah. But I would embrace that because I knew that meant I was about to do the thing I love the most in the world, which is getting on stage and performing music. Yeah. And once the psychologist that I was seeing at the time kind of helped me to see that feeling was no different, really. At its core, as to what I'd feel when I'd feel anxious going into a shopping centre full of people that I didn't like. Yeah. So once I could see the correlation between the two, I found I would cope a hell of a lot better. Yeah. Obviously I wasn't going to walk into Coles and get Limelight put on me and a mic in my hand.
Yeah,
but,
that's right.
But the feeling, like you said, it's just a label, really, isn't it?
Absolutely. And if you don't have that worried feeling or that anxious feeling of going on stage, then how do you know you love it when you're on there?
Exactly.
So we have to have the polarity of it. We have to have that to know that. If we never feel sadness, we can't know that we're happy. Because why do people get depressed during winter and not in summer? They're quite happy in summer and they're quite outgoing, they're outside.
Yep.
And then they see the weather and the weather's dull and then they can't go outside, which they normally love to do. And they actually start to get depressed in winter. So there's actually like a winter depression.
Yeah, right.
But it's understanding that and honouring that and then able to move on from it. What can I do if I can't do what I normally do in summer? And so you find your outdoor love that way.
Yeah.
And it's just a matter of just rephrasing and changing your mindset on,
100%.
You know, it's not like winter, you're just sad and it's like we're in hibernation.
Yeah.
It's more winter, I can go to Kaipo Forest, I can rug up and go out there and find some feathers or something or just do something outdoors.
Yeah.
And, you know, then you're connected to the land as well.
Yeah, most definitely. That's so important, isn't it? Like, I think whenever I start feeling a little disconnected in life, I'll take my shoes off, go down the beach and walk in the sand or even in the backyard on the grass and just feel that connection back to nature. I find, and I know it's pretty cliche to say it, but I find myself grounded like that.
Yeah, it's not cliche, it's actually a thing. Like, if you take your shoes off, you're now in the moment. You know, the ground, because if you're always in your shoes, you don't feel the ground, you don't feel the difference.
Yeah.
So once you take your shoes off and you feel the ground, you become in the moment rather than in the past or in the future, which we can't change the past and we can't know what the future is going to hold. So we end up being in the moment because it doesn't matter about anything because you're actually happy in your moment. So,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Two things that I got from that I want to just mention too. So one of them is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that one of the fundamental things about anxiety and depression is worrying about what might happen.
Yes.
So as you were saying before, if you're not in the moment, then you're worrying about what is coming.
Yeah.
And depression is worrying about things that have already happened, which you can't change.
Yeah.
And so I think coming back to the grounding thing, I think that's a really valuable thing to have out there, you know, is that, you know, maybe just as simple as taking your shoes off and going for a walk. But the other thing which is very much related to that is and it makes me wonder if this could be why we didn't appear to have as many sort of maybe issues as kids growing up as what the kids these days seem to.
Yeah.
Everywhere you look now, you go to a playground, you go to this or that, nearly every child has got shoes on or something on their feet. When we were kids, I think it was more of a rarity to see shoes on our feet. We'd be cruising around, walking over hot cement.
Yeah,
didn't
absolutely.
Matter. You know, it didn't matter.
Throughout the 6 weeks or 8 week school holidays we got over Christmas, I only wore shoes when we were going out like somewhere important, and other than that I never wore them. So yeah, and now like everybody does, as you say, so nobody's like people are doing it now because it's a thing that people are enjoying, but kids, they need to be able to run around with no shoes on and, you know, just knickers and t-shirts or something. They need to be able to run around in naked if they're young to actually feel that connection to the air, the land, everything. So it's really important.
Yeah, no, definitely. I actually have this funny story. When I was a kid, we used to go to this place. We used to always call it the Perrin Islands, but it was technically the land where the Perrin Islands were off the coast of, up in Northern Territory. Okay. And it was basically like a little community. They had little dirt roads. Everyone that sort of went there regularly had like a shack, which was essentially like a pretty much a bush house.
Yeah.
But pretty decent houses. They weren't shacks. They were like, you know, full functioning. But there was this one spot that we used to always frequent as kids, and it was like this massive big pit of dirt that was always getting wet from the torrential rains in Northern Territory. So it was like about that deep of mud. Yeah. And I have these photos, I reckon my dad probably still has them, of us sitting in there waist deep, and we're probably just wearing our undies or our board shorts, no shirt, nothing else, and just immersed in the mud. Yeah,
and how much did you get out of that? Like the nutrients and the stuff in the ground.
Yeah.
It's all there because it's good for us.
Exactly.
So, you know, I remember, you know, getting mud buckets and painting ourselves with it, so we're all mud. Like we'd run around all day like that.
Meanwhile, I was getting the first glow sticks that came into Australia because my mate's dad worked in a lighting company. He was one of the first,
nice.
And we were cutting them open and putting that on our skin.
Oh wow!
So we glowed.
Jeez.
Probably not a good idea, and I don't recommend you try that at home.
A few chemicals.
Yeah, but back then we didn't know any different. Like I think his dad told us after the fact. He's like, probably shouldn't do that. Yeah, it's not safe. But But the mud definitely absorbing it. It's like when you get a cold or chicken pox or whatever. I remember as kids we used to have parties where like we'd get all the kids together who hadn't had say chicken pox. So you'd get it and you'd build that immunity to it. Whereas now we're all like pop some pills, have a jab, and all this sort of stuff. And well, I'm not sort of downplaying maybe the importance of things like that, but we're not building the same immunity as what we did back then.
There's a place for natural medicine, like a place for modern medicine, but there's also a big place for natural medicine because a lot of the ingredients for modern medicine is from natural ingredients, and it's all the other stuff that they put in there. So, I know a few naturopaths, and they're amazing. Yeah. There's a lot of things that they can do, and there's some things that they just can't, and say, look, you got to go see your doctor for that.
Yeah, which is fair enough.
That's great, because if you can like even halve the amount of chemicals you're putting in, then it's going to make it so much better. So
one thing I find, and I don't know if this is something you find in your line of work, but I find a lot of people in society these days, we're always looking at the symptoms, not the root of the cause. Yep. Like, for example, I had a friend recently post up, she's involved in a company that sells different products for skin and so forth, and she's like, does anyone have any problem with dry skin? And I get a bit of dry skin around my nose, and I preempted she was about to try to push something onto me, and so I followed up my comment saying, I get dry skin, with saying, but I'd like to find out what's causing it, not just treat the dry skin as a symptom. And she respected me for saying so, but I find that a lot of the case, medication, for example, for anxiety and depression. Like I won't lie, and I've been very open about this on my social medias and on my show and all that, and in my music. But I did use CBD oil for a while to deal with my anxiety, but I only did it while I was getting the therapy to deal with the actual cause of it.
So situational.
Yeah, it was basically so I could get through the days at work and things without freaking out too much, while I was getting the tools that I needed to deal with it long term and get a handle on, which is what happened.
And that's really important, because you're not just relying on that for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
But also there's a lot of things that you can actually do naturally, like bay leaves. If you actually light them up, and the smoke from that's a natural antidepressant.
Wow,
so
I didn't know that.
Things like that. So a lot of the time in my sessions, if I've got someone that's really really anxious or depressed, I actually have this metal bowl and I chuck some in there, and they have a lighter and they just sit there and play with it. And we have really, really good sessions, and they love the smell. So that's anchoring them to that good feeling at the end of the session.
Yeah, wow.
So I'm using a lot of anchors with hypnotherapy in that as well.
That's awesome.
So being able to do that, like most people have bay trees, like bay leaf trees in their yards. So
bakery trees.
Bakeries, that would be
nice.
Go
give me a finger bun.
No. Does that.
No, that, I mean, and when you look in the context of, say, growing a garden, obviously that's a fairly big investment to set up a decent garden. But if you're only talking a few things like that, I mean, sage would be another good thing I would say. I know my mum was big on burning that. Interestingly, she was also very big on burning paper, in context, of course. So because she was a counsellor herself, she actually worked in a prison in the United States for 20 years, working with the drug and alcohol affected inmates of a women's prison. And one of her techniques, obviously they didn't burn things there, they weren't allowed, but one of the techniques she would use would basically, they'd write, say for example, if I was harbouring a grudge because you'd done something that upset me at one point, I couldn't get past it, I would write you a letter telling you how I felt. I wouldn't give it to you, I'd burn it, or in the case of the jail, prison, she'll probably get them to screw it up and throw it away. And by doing that, you're letting it go. It's
a really good thing to do. I also, if there's something that someone can't let go of, someone that they're either not with anymore or someone that has passed, I'll get them to bring in a photo, like a copy of it if it's someone they love. If it's someone they don't, they're more than happy. And what we do is we actually just light it up on the corner and just watch it go away while they let that go.
Thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been an absolute pleasure and a real insight into what you do, great work that you're doing there, and it's so good to have people like that in our corner, with mental health and things like and other afflictions like that kind of being so prevalent these days. A very quick shout out to Grow Clothing, who give me these lovely clothes to wear when I do my show. Thank you to them, growclothing.com.au. And thank you to Ripple and Swirl, even though, as I tell everyone when I do my shows, I don't ever ask for permission, I just rock up and do it. But thankfully they all support what I do by not kicking me out. So thank you to Ripple and Swirl for being gracious hosts with great coffee and great tea. And again, thank you to you.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
It's lovely to catch up with you.
Peace.